All right, folks. I'm probably going to be a moving target because I can't stand still, but I appreciate the introduction. Yes, I have been involved with the ghostly stuff for quite some time. I'm also a tour guide in Charleston, a licensed tour guide. And when I was asked to do this, I was wondering how I was going to do this because I tell stories, ghost stories, constantly, all the time. I've written 5 books on South Carolina's ghost tale, folklore, and legends, and I wanted to do something a little different. Honestly, I was burned out on telling the same ghost tales over and over again, so I wanted to do something fresh. So this is the first time I've ever done this. So you guys, we'll see how this goes. But when you stick your nose into places that are haunted, some things just happen. So that's what we're going to cover a little bit tonight. Some of the surprises that we got at a few locations, I'm going to cover about 3 or 4 of them, because they do happen when you're in these little haunted places. I'm not here to convince you there are ghosts. I'm not here, to do that at all. That's up to you. I'm just going to show you what some of the things that we've dealt with through the years. So the first thing is the misadventures of a Ghostorian, walking the line between the living and the dearly departed. Now that term Ghostorian, a lot of people have asked me about that. And what happened is, it's hard to read, but I was doing a consultation for the show Ghost Hunters. They wanted to do the Old City Jail, and they wanted to do the USS Yorktown, and I consulted for both of those episodes. Now the producer at that time was Kevin Kane, and we started talking about Charleston ghosts, and then he started talking about other ghosts outside of the ghosts that he was interested in. And eventually in one of the emails he nicknamed me the Ghostorian. Ghost historian, Ghostorian. So you can't read it, it's a little dark on there. But in one of his emails he said, feel free to print business cards with the title Ghost Historian or Ghostorian if you prefer. So Kevin Kane, the producer at Ghost Hunters, nicknamed me the Ghostorian. So this is what happens when a Ghostorian goes to all the places that he writes about, or he tours about. So we're going to go back a little bit, and I think the first story we're going to talk about is this one. Now this is the Somerville, South Carolina. That is the National Guard Armory. Now the story there was that there was a young soldier back in the 70s. He came back from one of his deployments to find that his wife had left him. Distraught, he went into the location, got into the shower, and took his own life, unfortunately. Now the place was haunted, allegedly. So what happens is a friend of mine by the name of Ike, let me try not to screw up his name because I always do, Casilianus, we call him Ike. Now Ike is running, obviously, is running a paranormal investigative group called Dark Order Paranormal Investigations. And he was involved with that for quite some time. So what happens is Ike is doing an investigation and the Charleston City paper has been invited. Now Nick wants to put a good impression on for the Charleston City paper. And he asked me if I would help him. We have been friends, and he asked me if I would help him install the video camera systems and the electronics there. So I have a background in retail security and I have run camera systems, so I agreed to help him. And we go there and we start setting things up. In fact, that's me back when I had dark color hair, before the gray set in. And that is Ike watching me set up. Now what happens is we do this investigation, and what allegedly happens in this place is that in the restrooms, the doors open and slam, water turns on, there's all sorts of noises, there's all sorts of apparitions that are seen through there, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So Ike and the group and me, we go in, we set up everything, we're in there with the newspaper and the photographer, Jonathan's out, and would you know it, nothing happens. Not a thing. So they write this article, who you gonna call? And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek making fun of us because nothing happened, but it's all in good nature, fun. So they took Jonathan Stout's photograph, one of the photographs of Ike sitting at the equipment, and they put it on the article. And this is Ike sitting at the equipment. Now, this was part of a newspaper article that I had framed, and I had it in my office for several years. And about 3 years later, it's up there in my office, and I'm taking it down actually. And my wife picks it up and she says, "Who's that other guy?" I said, "What other guy?" "That other guy. That other guy wearing a helmet that they stopped using in 1985. He's wearing the M1 class Army helmet. His boots are bloused in his pants. He's got his hand cupped into his pocket," which I've had a former sergeant tell me he used to beat his troops. They stuck their hand all the way in their pocket. They could hook their fingers, they could hook their thumbs. He says he's definitely military, probably Army, his guess. So, we did capture something. We have no idea who that is. There was nobody in there, and I doubt very seriously anybody in there was going to be wearing that helmet they stopped using in 1985. So, we did capture something, and it took us 3 years to figure it out. That was in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. In 2012, I wrote a book called Haunted Somerville, and I contacted the photographer and asked him if I could use the picture. And then I sent it back to him, and he had no idea what he captured in it. So you just never know. Now, what happens when you're a law enforcement officer and an investigator and you like things in a nice, neat package with a bow on top? And you like to have solutions to things. Well, sometimes you get thrown a curveball, and this is how I really got immersed into this. This is the second book that I did from Haunted Somerville. And that house is known as the Quackenbush List House. Quackenbush being the first owner, and Michelle List being the owner at the time that I did this. It has now changed hands again, so it would have a different last name, but that's how they name these homes. Quackenbush List Home is next to Rawlings School of the Arts. And the ghost tale is, according to former Mayor Bill Collins, who was very much invested into that story at the time in 2012, ladies in the house would wake up to a soldier kneeling at the foot of their bed or standing beside them holding their hand and praying. And now this soldier is wearing blue. So in the words of Bugs Bunny, somebody has taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque. Because he is definitely wearing the wrong color of the South. Now, he's wearing a blue uniform, and he's kneeling in the bed praying, and it just so happened that Bill Collins' wife and his mother were visited, Bill Collins being the mayor of Somerville at the time. So he had a great interest in this, so I started doing some research into it. What I found out is Rawlings School of the Art and Quackenbush List Home was built on a location that was known as Red Hill. And during the Civil War, there was a Confederate hospital there. Now, Red Hill being all clay, red clay, that's how it got its name. So there was a red clay hill there that had a Confederate hospital. Now, what ends up happening is during Reconstruction, they send a unit up there, a Union troops. This is after the war is over, they're doing Reconstruction, and they send a crew over there, a unit, known as the 1st New Bern Regulars out of North Carolina. And that's an all-black regiment. But their leader is a man by the name of Colonel James Beecher. And as I'm doing the research, I find out that Colonel James Beecher is a staunch abolitionist. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, that is her brother. Now, he's a staunch abolitionist and he's a minister. Well, I've just established a blue coat who is a preacher that was on the grounds. Now, when you're a detective and you have an armed robbery and you develop a suspect, what you need next for probable cause to obtain a warrant is identification. And you usually get that through a physical lineup or a photo lineup. So Google helped me out. I did a photo lineup just for giggles. I went on there and I found Confederate soldiers that looked alike. And I presented it to one of the ladies, or in a crime we would have called a victim, so the victim of the ghost. And I expected her to hem and haw and do absolutely nothing with this. And she took about 30 seconds and she identified him. She said, "I will never forget his face. I will never forget his eyes. That's him." And she picked him out. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, where's your restroom?" And she says, "It's down the hallway on the left." And I went in there and I got a little ill because I just developed probable cause that a ghost existed and I was not prepared for it. Now, let's talk about real quickly ghosts in law enforcement, something that you might not realize in this country. You see, in this country, being a former law enforcement officer, there are two types of laws in this country. There is civil law and there's criminal law. Civil law, somebody comes along and, well, they run over your mailbox, knock down your fence by accident, you sue them civilly, and you get a remedy. Or if they do it on purpose, they come by with a baseball bat, malicious damage, and they knock down your mailbox, and they beat down your fence, and you have them criminally charged. That's criminal law. So two types of laws. Let's start with Stombofsky versus Ackley. New York, 1999. Mr. Stombofsky has put down a down payment on a house being sold by Helen Ackley. He's put his down payment on it, getting ready to purchase it, and then he finds out that the house has been declared haunted. In fact, there's an article in Reader's Digest, and the more he researches, the more he finds out that it's been claimed to be haunted, and he wants to back out of the deal. Now, he does not want to raise his kids in there. He's concerned with the resale value on the house. So he wants to back out of the deal, and Helen Ackley's saying, no, I'm not going to give you back your money. So Jeffrey Stombofsky takes her to court. Back and forth they go, and it goes all the way up to the New York Supreme Court. And the New York Supreme Court in 1999 ruled that if the house was declared haunted, it is indeed haunted, and the ghosts do exist. It's the same as if you had a murder in your house. So New York Supreme Court, this is where it's coming into real estate law now, where you're having to start to disclose if a house is haunted. If somebody has died in the house, if there's been a fire in the house, if there's a ghostie in your house. So, the New York Supreme Court ruled that the ghost did exist, and they reversed any prior rulings, and Jeffrey Stombofsky got his deposit back. And now there is civil law that says there are ghosts that do exist. Now, what about criminal law? That's going to be a little bit tougher. Greenbrier, West Virginia versus Trout Shoe. This is known as the Greenbrier ghost case. Greenbrier, West Virginia. The woman that looks like a Native American there, she is Zona Easter Shoe, and she has married an individual by the name of Trout Shoe. Make a note, never marry a man named after foot or fishwear. Footwear or fish? Did I say it backwards? Fish or footwear? There you go. Now, Trout Shoe. I'm thinking ahead of myself. Now, what happens is she marries Trout. And Mary Heaster is her mother. Now, Mary Heaster's affectionate nickname for her new son-in-law is Satan. So, she very much is enamored with this young man. Now, she says there's something wrong with him. She does not like him at all. And then one day, unfortunately, Zona Shoe is found at the foot of the stairs. And she is deceased. Now, they call all the responding people over there. This is, 1897. All the responding people, the sheriff, the coroner, everybody goes over there. By the time they get there, Trout has taken her back upstairs. He has her in the bedroom. He has changed clothing of her. And he is cradling her inconsolable. He cannot even be separated from her. He's just hysterical. And all in attendance agree that it was an accident. And the coroner rules the death an accident. And they take poor Zona away. And then they bury her. And Mary Heaster is not satisfied. Oh no, Mom is not satisfied at all. So Mom begins to pray. And for the next 3 consecutive nights, her daughter comes back to her as a ghost. First night, she comes back as a ball of light and starts talking to her about the case and telling her things that happened in the case. And then the second night, she comes back as a physical apparition. And as she's talking to her mother, she tells her that Trout had been upset because when she prepared dinner that night, she had not prepared any meat. Well, it's hard to prepare meat when he's not working and providing it. So they get into a big argument. He begins strangling her. He snaps her neck and throws her down the stairs. And as she's discussing this with her mom, she turns her back to her mother and then spins her head completely around and continues the communication with her. Now she tells her items that have happened, items that have been used with that. Tells her all sorts of information, 3 consecutive nights. On the 3rd consecutive night, she says, Mary Heaster says, I don't know if I'll be able to do this, if I will have enough time, or I'll be able to convince anybody. And Zona tells her there will be enough time, according to the legend. Well, Mom starts on her crusade. She goes after the prosecutors, the first place she starts, and she tells them this ghost story. Now, he's humoring her because he thinks it's just a grieving mother, and he's just trying to pacify her, and he pushes her off to the next person, and round she goes, but she focuses on this prosecutor. There's just something about this man that she likes, and she keeps focusing on him. And she keeps pounding on him, on and on and on, and finally, just to humor her, he's going to talk to somebody. And when he talks to the coroner, he finds out the coroner never examined the body. And then he starts talking to people, and he falls down this rabbit hole. So much so that he goes and he's able to obtain enough probable cause to required for a search warrant, and he wants to exhume the body. But this has taken time. This has taken quite a while. And that's what Mom was concerned about. It taking quite a while. But this is West Virginia, and they buried her in the wintertime. So they had to wait anyway. There would be enough time. Because her body was frozen into the ground, they had to wait till the ground unthawed. Well, when they dug her up, when they finally had time to do it, guess what? She was completely well preserved. The ground had frozen, and her corpse had frozen. No decomposition, hardly any at all. When they did the autopsy, and they pulled that high-collared, moved the 2 pillows he propped her head up against in the coffin, and then moved that high-collared dress, they found bruising around her neck. When they did the autopsy, they found that her neck was broken between the first and the second vertebrae, the only vertebrae in your neck where you can spin your head completely around. And then they started finding other things, enough to where they charged Trout Shoe. At the trial, the prosecutor says, Mary Heaster, for God's sake, whatever you do, do not bring up this ghost stuff. They will discredit you and it will ruin you. Do not talk about the ghost. Okay, I won't. The defense attorney brought it up, and it backfired on him. It is the only United States case where a ghost was allowed to testify through proxy for her mother and convicted her own killer. He got life in prison. He got 3 years out of that life sentence. Well, how is that fair? Well, during the trial, they found out he had been married 3 times. The first wife, she was able to escape him because she was a victim of domestic abuse. During those days, she couldn't divorce him for that. No, he ended up going to prison for stealing a horse, and he was unable to provide for her, and that's how she divorced him. So she got away from him. Second one, well, Trout apparently was just roofing a house with a brick and dropped it on her head and killed her. Everybody roofs a house with a brick. So he killed his second wife and his third wife. So he spent 1 year in prison for each of the women that he married, and he died under suspicious circumstances. So there is criminal law in this country that says that ghosts exist. Civil law and criminal law. So who am I, being a former cop, to argue with the law, right? Ghosts exist. I don't have to convince you. The law's on my side. Always has been. That looks familiar. USS Yorktown. I wrote a book in 2012 on the ghost of the USS Yorktown. And then there was a tour that was developed there, and now Bulldog Tours, the company that I work for, does tours on there also. Now one night, there's a group of investigators on there. Now this previous company I'd worked with, I had negotiated. I'd written the book, and I found out that the company was developing a tour, and I met with the owners and I negotiated. And they hired me to write the tour for them, to teach the tour, but also in the negotiation, I found out they were going to do paranormal investigations on the show. So I negotiated that in my contract too. And what I did is I wanted to host all those investigations. I didn't want to hunt ghosts. I wanted to watch everybody else do it. So since 2012, I probably hosted until about 2020. I probably hosted over 60 investigations on the show. And I've seen some interesting things. Now, what I'm going to show you is what happened one night when you least expected things. There is a word used at the end of this thing in context. Now, yeah, I've had a lot worse videos, but this word rhymes with rigging, but it starts with an F, so if that offends you, just be aware it's going to be at the end of this. I don't really classify that, because I've used a lot worse in some of these places when things have dropped and glasses broke and everything else. Now, What I'm going to show you is what is known as a ghost grid or a star grid. I am hosting a group of investigators, and they are setting up this gadget. I've seen it before, I've used it before, but I wanted them to set it up in a dark area so I could film it for the owner of the company, so I could show it to him the next morning. He would be in awe of it. He would purchase it where I didn't have to, and then I could use it. See, there's a smart way of going about things with them. So what has happened is I've taken them into a dark area and I've had them set it down a corridor. And what this ghost grid does is that you put it on a tripod and it projects a series of laser dots into a room. Puts them on the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. And the dots are not supposed to move unless something in the room moves. And you usually leave it with a camera and go back and pick up all your equipment. Well, I've had them set it up, and what is happening is the gentleman is in the doorway and he's got a tripod with this laser thing on it. He's on his knees and he's setting it up. And I'm standing with a cell phone with my face against the middle wall. And I've just got it over him. I'm not even seeing what's happening. And there's a young lady kind of behind us. So what she does is she tells him to go down there and check it out. She sees something moving. He says, I think it's a reflection off of something. And then he says, oh. Then she tells him to go down there and check it out. Well, who's in the way? All of us are, and his equipment too. So what is happening is I'm moving out of the way, he's moving, she's trying to help him, and nobody's looking down that hallway to see what's happening 3 feet from us. And nobody sees it until the next day when I get ready to send this video to the owner of the company. Now you will hear me say, that's friggin' awesome. I'm a moron. Because what is really awesome is happening in the lights, but nobody has seen it while it's happening. So take a look at the ghost grid over there on the right, the dark area. He's trying to adjust it on that tripod.
Keep with your head spot, keep it like walk back. Walk back. Yeah, because
That is so friggin' awesome.
that's
Somebody moving,
Oh, did you catch that? That's how these things happen. They show up in pictures when you're not expecting it, or you're doing something else and something happens. But now, before I close this out tonight, just a little bit, let's see what we've got a little while to go, don't we? I may tell a little bit after this, but I want to introduce you to my favorite spot. This might take a little bit. Well, one more time. There you go. Anybody recognize that? Let's talk about that a minute. That's probably going to take us right to closing, so we can talk about that a minute. The Old City Jail in Charleston, 21 Magazine Street. Let's talk about that place a minute. Prior to it being there, the city is founded. Charleston Charlestown is founded in 1670. By the time the British invaded in 1780, well, they have had, the very beginning, they have built a large place called the Burying Ground. Now, as a potter's field or a pauper's field, when the city was founded in 1670, they built this old burying ground. And by the time the British invaded in 1780, it's completely filled. And according to historian Nick Butler with the library in Charleston, 36,000 people were buried in that spot in a little over 100 years. For comparison, Magnolia Cemetery has about the same amount, if you're familiar with Magnolia on the outskirts of Charleston. So 36,000 people are buried there as a foundation. And then in the middle of it, we have a powder magazine. And when the British captured Charleston, well, they started confiscating all the weapons from the Charlestonians. So Charlestonians have always been helpful, even when the British captured us. That's just the way we are. We're polite. And we went to the British and said, hey, you know, we're not trying to tell you how to handle your siege of Charleston, or your capture of us, or how to run a war. But we want to let you know, here in the South, we like to keep our guns loaded. Still do. You might want to make sure they're unloaded before you shove them in there with all that gunpowder. We're just saying. Of course, the British didn't listen to us. They kept shoving them in there until one of them fired off and blew up all that gunpowder. Killed around 300 people, if I'm not mistaken, turned the block into a crater. They had a massacre, and British soldier parts were raining down on the Unitarian Church. Locked us away. So now you have a foundation of 36,000 people, and then you have a massacre. And then in 1802, the city's looking for a place to put a jail, and somebody says, Voila. Can't hurt the property values there. Why don't we throw a jail on it and add to the ambiance? And that's what they did. 1802 to 1939, 137 years as a jail. 137 years as a jail. Now, they had executions on the ground. They had death, murders in there. They had disease. They had the worst human beings could do to each other in that place. Inhumanity. Subhuman conditions. In fact, that's why they closed it down in 1939. You had no running water and there had no electricity in there. They used buckets for restrooms. And sometimes those buckets did not get dumped frequently. Sometimes they got dumped accidentally right into the hay, which was your bedding. So disease was constant there. Horrible, filthy place. 137 years as a jail. Now, Bulldog Tours, they did tours there for about 20 years. And it's a privately owned location. It's considered the most haunted place in the city of Charleston. And what did the owners decide to do? Well, with the most haunted place in Charleston, let's turn it into an office building. The first floor is going to be a museum. The second and third floor is going to be an office building with a coffee shop. Now, what could go wrong? I want to get the phone call when they go in there and they find all their furniture stacked up in a giant pyramid in one corner one day. Most haunted place. Now, all jokes aside though, seriously, I'm glad something is happening to it, because the first little tremor that we had, or the first big wind that we had, we wouldn't have it at all. And that's not the most strangest thing that building has ever been. In 1954, it was a kindergarten. Yeah, can you imagine the timeout for the kids? Yes, they used it as a kindergarten. And, well, there are probably some little serial killers from that class somewhere around. Anyway, I wonder if Pee Wee Gaskins was part of that class. I don't know, but old city jail. So the most haunted place in the city of Charleston. Now, gave you a little background on it. Now, I work with Bulldog Tours. I have for a while. And the only reason I do my own private tours, I stopped doing that because I just had too much going on. So I work exclusively for Bulldog right now. Now, Bulldog did those tours there. And the only reason I will work for Bulldogs as a public company, to give them a little plug, is that when John Laverne created this company, he decided he was going to give back to the community. So a portion of the sales of the tickets go back to the community. And then about the 20 years that they've been in existence or so, they've given about $5 million back to the locations that they do tours at. The Old City Jail, the Yorktown Circular Congregational, the Old Exchange Building. Yes, they put their money where their mouth is. And I'm about conservation and preservation, so that's the only reason I work for this company. A little plug. Now, I had to do that because I'm going to talk about that company. That company, we did the tours there. Now, they had over 70 guides affiliated with that company. Over 70 guides affiliated. And all these guys wanted to do that tour. Why wouldn't they want to do that tour? It's a great place, great history, great ghost tales, wonderful, amazing architecture. But why wouldn't they want to do it? Well, the reason they wouldn't want to do it is that if you're the last tour guide doing the last tour, guess who shuts the place down by themselves? And it don't matter what time it is. Yeah, it can be 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. You're doing it third floor all the way down, shutting everything down. Now, something's going to happen to you. It's going to happen when you're opening it up, or it's going to happen when you're closing it down. And usually closing it down. So opening it up, if you're quick, you can do it 10, 15 minutes. You're running wide open. But closing it down, I'm sorry, you're in there a minimum of 35 minutes. Minimum. And things happen in there. So, what happens is we usually, in the springtime, a lot of college students would want to do that tour, and we'd hire them and put them in there. And by summertime, there were no more college students doing the tours, but we had a lot of great stories. Human guinea pigs. Now, it got to the point where out of the 70 plus guys that we had, only 7 of us would do that. And I'm going to give you an idea exactly why. This is me closing it down. Now what has happened is I'm starting to close it down. I've done the third floor, I'm on the second, and I'm starting to hear what sounds like somebody is talking in voices. So you'll hear me move, and then you'll hear me stop and listen. You'll hear me move, you'll hear me stop and listen. I want you to watch until I get on the stairs. When I go down the stairs, And I stop on the stairs. That's what I want you to pay attention to. So this is why we don't have guides doing this for long. That's me moving. You notice my breath is picking up. I'm a little huffing and puffing there too. Now when I stop on the stairs, now you notice there's a pep in my step. Yeah, let me get on down the stairs. Now, that's why we don't have young people sitting in the jail. Now, how did that sound like to you? A child? Yeah, it is. Now, our guides, one of our guides, very correctly, I believe, said that there are certain entities in there that identify with other people and they befriend them. So, Joy, the lady that said that, she says that there is a guard in there, that she's named Cedric. She has no idea who he is, but she says there's a guard that protects her in there. Good for you. Brian Kirkman. Now, I don't know what Brian Kirkman and Willie Marcus have in common, and I never ever want to know. Because Willie Marcus stabbed his wife 41 times, so I don't know why him and Brian get along. And I don't want to know, because I don't want to testify to anything later. But Brian Kirkman, and that's the one that associates with him. But there are two that kind of had an interest in me, and they were both children. We'll talk about this one in a minute, but the one on the first floor was actually a little girl, and we have no idea who she is, but we call her Bridget. And Bridget, we believe she's one of the debtor's children. Now, back during the day, if you were a debtor and you couldn't pay your debt, you had nobody to watch your family, guess who came to the jail to help you work it off? The wife and the kids. I'm sure that went over really, really well. Guess where we're going, honey? Yeah. So we believe she's one of the debtor's children, and she's down in the area where they kept the supplies in the kitchen area. So we believe she worked in the kitchen, but she's usually seen around that area, and she's a trickster. Little blonde-haired girl with a little braid down her back. This individual. In about 1910, Alonzo Smalls was playing on a trolley car and knocked it into gear. And it took off with him, and it turned the corner as Captain Thomas Sims was stepping off another one, and it ran over him and killed him. The authorities, they went out and found Alonzo, and they charged him with murder, and they brought him back to that old jail, and they housed him in it. And Captain William Bennett, the head of the jail, took one look at Alonzo and could not bring himself to put him in those cages with those monsters up there in Murderer's Row, so he allowed him to stay out there in the hallway. He did this because Alonzo Smalls was 10 years old. The youngest known murderer housed in the jail. We have no idea whatever happened to Alonzo, but Alonzo was still there. Now, I've looked for the records. I have not been able to find anything other than a few newspaper articles. But Alonzo still haunts there, and that's who we heard tonight. Now, so I'm going to leave you with that for food for thought. Now, these are things, going into places, you just don't expect certain things to happen. You just hear the tales, and you tell the tales, and you have them over and over again. But sometimes when you're a Ghostorian and you're doing this for a living, you end up with a few misadventures. So that's what I wanted to leave you guys with before Halloween. Not trying to convince you. No, that's not my job. I'm not trying to convince you. But I'm just showing you that sometimes when you stick your nose in places, sometimes things happen. So I'll leave you guys with that tonight. So thank you guys. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Why were you filming that going down the steps?
Because, as I was saying earlier, I had closed down the third floor. It's 3 floors. So I'd already closed down the third floor. By the time I got to the second floor, I've heard doors, and I've heard what sounded like people breathing. So what I did is I turned on my phone. It's like there's something going on in here, and I don't know what it is. So that's why I didn't get the third floor. I'd already closed down the third floor. So what I was getting is the second and the first floor. And what I got is after I pretty much closed down the second floor, I turned on that camera. And actually, to be honest with you, I didn't close down any floors, because if you continued watching it, I'd already closed down the third floor, I closed down the second floor. That happened, I skipped the first floor, set the alarm, and went home. Because there are friends in my liquor cabinet to help me get through this. Yes?
So why were you there by yourself?
Because I was closing down after the tours. I was the last tour guide closing down after the
I wouldn't
tours.
let anybody leave without.
Yeah. I will tell you honestly, in all sincerity, I am more scared of the living than I am the dead. And from my previous career, I can take a legal pad and I can write a line down the middle, and I could write living and dead. And I could fill up the legal pad of all the living people that tried to kill me and harm me and do bad things to me. There is nobody on the dead side, so I'd rather hang out with them. Yes?
I have a question real quick. So when you started this, the Ghostorian part of your career, did you begin sort of more skeptical?
Yes.
And then gradually change over time to
Yes.
more today? Okay.
I did. I was very, very skeptical, and then things started happening, and then there was things that you just couldn't explain. And I explained it. I'll steal basically an explanation from a man named Alan Daniluk. And he explained it this way. He said that when you were sick before, science thought you had bad blood, so the best way to get you well is to cut you and bleed you, or put leeches on you. And in fact, they killed George Washington because he had pneumonia. They bled him to death. He probably would have survived it. And then this man comes along and says, you know, I don't think that's what's making people sick. I think these are these little things called germs, and well, I think that's what it is. Well, show us a germ. I can't. Well, take your ghost and get out of here. And somebody invents a microscope, and then people like Louis Pasteur, everything they say, you know, he said, and those scientists said, we believe now, and we laugh. If you went to your doctors right now and you tried to pull out a jar of leeches, you go straight to your attorneys next. So science changes. So who's to say, according to Alan Daniluk, that 60 years from now, somebody doesn't invent something that shows that something exists long after we depart? And my own 2 cents to that is, the problem with that thinking, that thought process, is when you say ghost, ghost equals spirit, spirit equals soul, soul equals religion, and science doesn't want to touch religion. If you say ghost equals energy, energy is neither created nor destroyed. You get into physics, you get into quantum physics, and science will touch it. And that's the way I think it should be looked at. I think ghost is a bad name for it. Anyway, yes.
I had experiences in the home that I just sold and moved down here. I lived there 44 years.
Mm-hmm.
But after my parents had passed away, and I lived in the house by myself, and it was a double. I lived downstairs. I had families usually living upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I would travel or come down here to see my son, they would hear noises in my apartment downstairs. They would hear doors slamming. They would hear the cupboard doors opening and shutting. The drawers where my silverware and all other things were doing. And it was continuous. And I would leave my door open, you know, and they would come down, turn the lights on, silence.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had an experience. It never happened when I was home, but it happened when I was away. Then I had an experience. I had a walk-through room to a family room on an addition. And I was at my computer and I was doing some things. And in this back room, my TV room as I called it, I had a fan in the ceiling. And I'm sitting there, you know, all of a sudden, the fan's on. Now the switch is on the wall next to a window. Fan is on. I said, need the fan. I don't even have a fan on. So I go in there, turn it off, the switch was moved, turned it off, went back and sat down. 20 minutes later, the fan went on. And I said,
You needed him.
I know, well, this is what happened. I mean, this was, so I just stood in the doorway of the room and I said, listen, cut it out. I'm doing something. I turned off the fan, went back to what I was doing. Now, I have gone to psychics. I love that kind of stuff. So they always tell me my father's around me and he's protecting me. So she said, do you have any questions? I said, yes. Would you ask my dad because he's there, if he turned the fan on in the TV room. And she got a broad smile on her face, and she said, he's laughing. He said, that was him, but he didn't go into the kitchen when you weren't home. That was the end.
Well, two things on that note pretty quickly. One is I got involved with a person not too long ago on a few projects, and it's been a great relationship working with her. And her name's Andrea St. Amand. Now, when I was in law enforcement, being a law enforcement officer, one thing we didn't get along real well with was attorneys. And then when I got into the paranormal side of things, one thing I didn't get along real well with was mediums or psychics. Andrea's both. She's a former attorney turned psychic. So it's like gas, and fire. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, sometimes when I was doing some of these investigations or researches on these places, I'd go into some of them. So I took this lovely young person with me, this young lady one day, and we were in this old house that was allegedly haunted. And there was a big dining room, kind of like I guess a sitting room is what it would have been back in the day. So she's standing in the kitchen, and she's doing some things in the kitchen and writing some notes. And I go into this dining room area, and I'm looking around in there and looping around, and apparently she didn't see me. And I'm in there, and I'm hearing these cabinets moving and these doors kind of opening in the kitchen. I'm thinking, okay, she's in there doing her thing. So I horse her around, and she's talking. And I come out ahead of her. She's looking down, she's talking. And I say, who are you talking to? And she looks up, she looks around, she says a word that rhymes with duck, and she went right out the door. She thought she was talking to me, and she thought I was opening the cabinets and the doors all around her while she was writing and taking notes. I thought it was her. There was somebody else in there opening cabinets and doors, and I could not get her to come back in that house to save my life. So yeah, that goes a lot like what you were saying there.
Yes.
But anyway, but I had to plug Andrea since you brought up. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a little bit of a skeptic here. My in-laws have lived on Broad Street or south of Broad for maybe 30, 40 years. And I know a lot of their friends, on all those streets, Water Street, Trad Street, and everything like that. I have never run into anybody that has run into a ghost. Why do you think some old places have ghosts and whereas there's a lot of other old places that don't have ghosts?
I don't know. There are a lot of new places that allegedly have ghosts.
Okay, so you don't think it's
historical,
or that it could build up that, okay.
I think a couple of things with that from going back into law enforcement. I think that when you have a trauma or you have some sort of situation, let me try to phrase this where, let's say for instance you have a person who has trauma, he has all sorts of problems going on, he's depressed, he has all these issues, and all that energy is built up into him in a big ball. And then he takes his life, and all that energy just disperses back out onto those walls and into that whole building. And it stays stagnant for a while until somebody walks in with those same emotions. That person walks in off the street that's depressed, and it triggers it, or it senses it, and it just brings it all back, and it creates what I would believe is a residual haunting. It brings it back up. So maybe it's just dormant in these houses, or maybe they haven't had that type of trauma. And one of the things that a lot of people, I disagree with, but a lot of people believe that the strongest feeling that will bring a ghost back is unfinished business and revenge. No. It's love.
I knew it, honey, I knew it.
Love is the strongest feeling, and love, you've got all these people, these unrequited loves. They've lost their loved ones. You've got Alice Flagg over there in Pawleys Island that, she died of malaria and her brother threw the ring into the river and she never had her love and she searches for her love. It's love. It's not hatred. And if anything's going to keep you tied to something that you love, it's not going to be something that you hate or something you want to get back at. So that's my 2 cents on that. So hopefully that kind of helped you. Yes?
Do you think that more people nowadays accept the existence of a spirit or a ghost?
I think
as
so.
compared to in former times, whatever those former times are?
Yes, with a caveat. My thing is, I do believe that more people believe in the existence of ghosts. The young people believe in the existence of ghosts. But I think that most of the time, what they're believing is a ghost is not necessarily ghosts. Because you've had a ghost in a haunted place for 100 years and people experienced it over and over and over again. And now these people can't find it unless you got some gadget in your hand, some electronic that beeps and makes noise.
But more so, maybe ghost is not a good word, but a visiting spirit.
Visiting spirits,
Just curious.
visiting spirits, I think there's, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on that as far as visiting spirits. Maybe there's more, maybe it's just more people are interested in it now, and it seems to be more because more people are talking about it now than it used to be. Because when I was growing up, my mom and my grandmother always talked about ghosts, and it was always in the family and all that. But do not go out of the house or you get your behind beat if you start telling these stories. So it's something we kept in the family. And then when I did the Somerville book, I couldn't find any ghost tales, a whole lot of them, until I got into the network. And then once I got into the network, this person introduced me to this person. It was like they had pets. And it's like, oh, well, I've got this ghost, but you need to go talk to somebody about this ghost. And that's how I wrote the book. It's going from people to people to people. It was like going to a ghost show, you know, and everybody's parading their ghosts and having them jump over fences and stuff. Like, I got a Siberian Husky ghost or whatever it is. But that's pretty much how it is. I think more people are interested in it. And getting back to the point I was going to make with the young people, I think if they've got a gadget in their hand and somebody tells them it's a ghost and it beeps, they're going to believe there's 20 ghosts in there twerking somewhere, you know. So I think they just, you need to use your senses and, you know, and accept it. And I'm not here to convince people there are ghosts or are not ghosts. You know, my thing is, it's kind of like a religious experience, and you won't understand it until you have it happen to you. So, anybody? Yes, sir.
It sounds like you're an experienced investigator in
Right.
your career.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever go back and say, these things can't happen, and look into it in your investigating detail the way you would when you were an officer of the law? I mean, it sounds like you would believe things like that can't happen and go back and try to find the reason for what you have presented here tonight.
Most of the time I can write stuff off. I'm really good at writing it off. And I'm not poo-pooing any of your favorite ghost shows, but I can't go out and find something every single week. You know, we're talking about, you saw 4 things, and that spanned from 2008 all the way up to 2021. I might have maybe half a dozen more things. So we're talking over 12 years, or more, no, 12, 13, about 15 years. About 15 years of this, I might have, you know, maybe 10 great experiences. So there's a lot of things I write off, because I usually try to solve it. But there are some things you just can't find the answer to. And then going back to the law enforcement career, you know, after I started getting into this and got more into believing some things, I have a good friend who was a crime scene sergeant. And we worked a lot of cases, and then when we started sitting down and talking about some of the cases that we worked in the past, some of the things that would happen that, you know, it's like, you know, I wonder now, you know, and he's like, I wonder too. I wonder when we get all those crime scene photographs, and we take all these photographs of the crime scene, and then he'd get all these lights and things twisting above the bodies and stuff like that, and it looked like somebody took lighted noodles and spun them around and get all this, and he thought it was just bad lighting, and they throw them to the side and take all the good photographs. And it's like, did we capture somebody's soul dancing around over the top? Because we used to get those all the time. Or we were in there one day and we were doing before Y2K, we were doing evidence inventory. We had to back up everything because the world was going to go to the end there. Everything's going to crash at Y2K. And we're standing there and we're talking about an individual that's a good friend of ours that committed suicide. And we had this card catalog. And this card catalog, the drawer comes out, it rolls out, and it flips over, it slings over cards, and every card's upside down except the guy we're talking about. And it had his name, his evidence cards were there. So we kind of looked at each other. It upset the secretary that was in there so bad we had to send her home. And Ricky and I just stopped what we were doing, and we sat in there and we talked about him for quite a while because it was a way that we felt, whether it was actual or coincidental, we felt he came back. And we felt it was a moment to honor him and talk about him and how much he meant to us. So things like that. So yes.
Okay, I did a bulldog tour, one of the best tours really, and we did the jail, but we did it at 10:30 in the morning because there were a bunch of women, and we raised chickens. The things that they talk about on the tour, are they all true or?
You did the history tour then in the morning. Yes.
Yeah, and and he was talking about a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
That was true then. We rolled across, and it was the young boy they think.
Mm-hmm. That was Alonzo. There was a wheelchair on the 3rd floor, and Alonzo liked playing with that chair.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And the other one was when we were leaving the one room, he showed us a picture that somebody had taken on the wall, and all these people are standing there. They're ghost-like figures. They're not human figures there, but you could tell they were supposed to be human.
Yeah.
Is that true then too? Somebody had.
What happens is a lot of the pictures that we have are the people on the tours that take the pictures.
Yeah, and that's
So
what this-
yeah, and that one I know there's 2 pictures. So is it the one with the red tint or the one with the?
I don't remember a red tint.
Okay, there's another one where what had happened with that one is allegedly they'd go do the ghost tours, and then as people would leave the room, somebody would stop by and just take their camera and hold it to the door and snap a picture, and then go. And then they get to the next place, and then now there's a room full of people in the photograph, or there's a person standing in the corner. So I wished I had all those up on this PowerPoint. I could show you a few of those, but
Because I saw, he had showed it to us because he hadn't transferred it over to his camera. I was like, that's spooky. It's the one where they keep score of how long they've been in the prison and stuff.
there's a lot of photographs we've had through the years from people. The wheelchair was a wheelchair they put up on the 3rd floor, and it had a tendency to roll wherever it wanted to, and Alonzo was known for playing with it. And the story was that there was a ghost tour going on one night. The guy who did a history tour, first of all, he did a history tour, and he went up one morning, and the chair was spinning. And it stopped as soon as they got up there. And it stopped, so he walked the people past it, and he just forgot about it. And then about 3 nights later, he's doing a ghost tour, and there's a little girl that's in there with her mom, and the little girl goes out in the hallway, and she sits down in the dark next to the wheelchair. And the guy's like, okay, that's weird. She's a weird kid. And anyway, so he goes and he starts continuing to tell his tales, and when he finishes, he starts to walk out, and the little girl comes running in, and she goes, Mister, I need to tell you something. It's important. And he goes, yes, ma'am, what's that? She says, the little boy I was talking to and playing with out there in the hallway said he's sorry he scared you the other morning when he was playing in the wheelchair. He wanted me to let you know he was sorry. And he said his knees started to buckle, and he had to go up and lean up against the wall for a while and collect himself. And then had to explain it to the group, and the group didn't want to do the rest of the tour. So yeah, so that was the story that with the wheelchair, one of them. So anyway. Anybody else? Well, I think we got everybody. All right.